This podcast is sponsored by A. Miller George Funeral Home, where each life is celebrated, and their sister company, Cremation London and Middlesex, both family-owned and operated. By Hyde Park Care Pharmacy. Experience the difference an independent pharmacy can make for you and your loved ones. Hyde Park Care Pharmacy offers personalized care, short wait time, very competitive pricing, easy transfer of your prescription, and much more. And by Molly Maid. During these times of COVID-19, it has never been more important to keep your family safe. With the Healthy Home Cleaning System, Molly Maid London is here to help. Make your home a healthy haven. Call Molly Maid London today.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever and whenever you may be tuned in. We welcome you back to another edition of the Vicars Crossing podcast, bonus edition. The Vicars Crossing is a place where faith intersects with the public square, and where I have intersected with my friends again. I'm Rob Henderson from Holy Trinity St. Stephen's in London.
He's a good guy. He's a good guy. Kevin George here from St. Aidan's Church.
My name is Ian. I make this podcast wheels turn.
He does. He is.
There.
He is the man behind the entire operation.
Yeah. Well, as I said, it's a bonus edition of the Vicars Crossing podcast because we're getting ready for a special day Friday. It's World Food Day. And so we have a guest coming in, Jim Cornelius, who's going to be talking to us a bit about that and educating, me, because I know a little bit about it, but probably not much. And I wanted to find out more. And I know Kevin did and Ian did. So we want to find out more from Jim. So we'll be inviting him in just a few minutes.
Yeah, Jim's an interesting guy. And this World Food Day is not something I knew much about, actually. So I'm excited to hear what he's got to say. But this is an initiative out of the United Nations, I understand it. But there's a lot of movement there towards this year, especially with COVID. And they do a lot of work around seeds and around making sure the farmers have what they need and that sort of stuff. And just to talk about food insecurity around the world, it's not just in the inner cities where people hunger. There's a lot of rural issues out there too, I guess. So
right, yeah, it's one of those things we've talked about before. Is this idea of scarcity versus abundance, because it's not that there's not enough. Right. There is abundance. It's the way it's being distributed and such, and policies around that and such. So we get into that a little bit more coming up. Hello to our sponsors here in the Vicars podcast, the Vicars Crossing podcast, to A. Miller George Funeral Home, where each life is celebrated, and their sister company, Cremation London and Middlesex, both family owned and operated. And Dave Mullen, a great support. We say hi to everybody out at A. Miller George Funeral Home today.
Yo, Dave, how you doing, buddy? Shout out to Carol Basato over at Hyde Park Care Pharmacy, where you'll get all your pharmaceutical needs in a beautiful, locally owned, locally operated, locally loved store, and a finer pharmacist you will not find. So if you're in the London area, get away from the big box, multi-billion-dollar outfits and go to an independently owned pharmacy and see Carol. Tell her the Vicars Crossing sent you.
And we also want to say a special thank you to Molly Maid. Make your home a healthy haven. Call Molly Maid London today. If you need that cleaning, you need that dusting, bring them up.
How's your room?
It's spotless, except for me. I'm the spot in the room.
So Molly came by?
Yeah. It was wonderful. Watching the room, no dust in the air. You can drag your finger across my desk and there wouldn't be any dust.
Nice.
I mean, I live super cleanly. What
was there a nice pine sol smell?
Absolutely. Everything. We want to say thank you to Trisha Lister for that.
Oh yeah.
So if you're walking down the street and you pass by some guy that smells like Febreze, that's Ian.
He's been cleaned by Molly Maid.
Oh yeah.
All right. We're a couple of days late to remind everybody to join us for the Canadians Praying for Americans this past week, but we do want to make mention that this is continuing. So you might be early for next week. So just a reminder to everybody that if you're still interested in that, right, Kevin, we can get people signed up and to take part next Wednesday.
100%. Just email us at CanadiansPrayingForAmericans@mail.com. And that's the number 4 in the middle. Canadians Praying for Americans. And This episode is up on World Food Day on the Friday. So get to us before Wednesday next week. Diana Butler Bass will be with us on that Wednesday, as well as musical offering from David Weaver, and it's going to be a great night. So please be in touch. We have over 120 people, coast to coast to coast, across provinces. We'd love to have you.
All right, good stuff. So it's time now for Sickness or Suds. Cheers on the Vicars Crossing. I'm going to throw Ian a little curveball here, and we're going to put some spooky music under Sickness or Suds. Can we do that, Ian?
Oh, yes, I can do that.
Music?
There's some spooky music.
Here it is, right there.
Here we go. So
Wow,
because we're getting close to Halloween.
Yes.
Far off, a couple of weeks away. So I thought on Sickness or Suds today, I have an apropos clue for you today. So I'm going to give you a couple of words here, and you're going to tell me whether it's a sickness or a sud. A beer. Okay. So today's clue is walking corpse. Walking corpse. Is the walking corpse a brew? Maybe an orange brew on a Halloween evening, or would it be something that you wouldn't want to show up at the Halloween party with?
Isn't that Donald Trump's nickname?
The walking corpse.
No. Oh, sorry. My apologies. Send your letters and love notes to vicarscrossing@gmail.com.
Yeah, that's Kevin George at Vicars Crossing.
Yeah.
Okay, Ian. So you want to take a crack at this first? Walking corpse.
Well, I got the one last podcast wrong, so I'm gonna think on this one. I think it's a sud. Because I think it's one of those things where it's like you get so plastered that like the only thing you can do is just walk home. Like you don't even know what's going on. You're just dead, but you're so drunk. You're just walking. That's what I think it is. I think it's a sud.
If that's what it is, then I've been a walking corpse and I've lived among walking corpses. I'm gonna go with a sickness. I think it's got to do with some sort of like near morbidity thing. So
okay. Yeah. Well, this time we got to give thumbs up to Kevy on this one. Sorry.
Wow.
Yeah. Sorry. Ian's 0 for 2 this week. Walking corpse. Right. It's also known as Coddard syndrome. Named after Coddard was the scientist that discovered it in the late 1880s. It's a neuropsychological disorder that involves people actually believing that they are dead, or that they have no soul, and they actually think that part of their body is missing, although it's not. So it's a psychological, neuropsychological disorder. It's called the walking corpse.
The walking corpse. I've been just last week I was referred to as the piss tank preacher.
The piss tank preacher.
And I'm wondering if I can get that was on Twitter for the Praying for Canadians event we have coming up. One of the Trumpers got excited and called me piss tank newfie preacher, and I'm offended by the word newfie. So you can call me a piss tank preacher all you want, but for God's sake, don't make the implication that I'm stupid. So this sort of a new nickname, I'm like, okay, well, so how do I get from that to the walking corpse, Robbie? What have I got to do?
I don't know. We're gonna have to. Well, first of all, we need T-shirts and a hat.
I do, yeah. I mean, I've been Revy Kevy for 20 odd years, and now I feel like I got to be piss tank.
You're rebranding.
Piss tank preacher. Yeah, I'm rebranding.
We could hashtag that. We could do hashtag piss pot preacher. And
I think the problem is I'm giving too much credit to this Twitter user whose name is Hemiskull 04628. Doesn't have a name or a picture. Hemiskull, isn't that like half brain?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So anyway, I think I'll stick with Revy Kevy.
Good. Keep that.
Yeah.
All right. Ready for our next part of a Vicars Crossing today? It's time for Ask Ian anything. That was scarier than the music.
That really was. Holy moly.
Smokes.
Woo! Well, Ian, today we've got a question for you that's not about hockey, as it was earlier in the week. This is a deeper question, no doubt. So this question comes to us from Squamish, British Columbia. Squamish. Have you ever been to Squamish, British Columbia yet?
I've never been to British Columbia. It's on the list of things I want to do, though.
Okay. All right. Well, this comes from our friend Orpha. in Squamish, British Columbia, and Orpha wants to know,
Mm-hmm.
How might people improve their self-esteem? So this is making you into basically Dr. Phil. Okay, so that dog ain't gonna hunt. I'm gonna tell you now, if you want to increase your self-esteem, you're gonna have to lose 40 pounds.
I feel like there's no magic answer. There's no like, oh, you have to lift 200 pounds and you'll be perfect, or like there's no like, oh, eat this food at 12 a.m. and you'll have amazing self-esteem. I think it comes with like being confident in what you're doing, being confident in yourself, like understanding yourself as a person, and not like not trying to overthink every aspect of your life. It comes with just like understanding who you are, and just, I don't know, time, I guess. Because obviously like self-esteem is one of those things that like isn't always a constant. Like you're not always constantly like, you don't always feel 100% all the time, right? Like emotions are fluid. So it's one of those things that I feel like everyone's always working on.
Right.
So it's just, it's a process, and yeah.
Sounds good. What about you, Rob?
That's good. That's an excellent answer.
Somebody lands in your office and says,
yeah,
Vicar, I have very low self-esteem. Help me.
Well, you know what? I've always loved the adage that your opinion of me is none of my business.
Ooh.
So I always found that kind of helpful. Yeah. And but what Ian said is so true, because anybody that says they walk around with complete self-esteem 24/7 is a liar.
Yeah.
Right. Because we all have those moments where we're feeling pretty down on ourselves and don't look too good in the mirror. But that adage has always helped me, because it reminds me that oftentimes, I have to be the author of how I'm seeing myself, and you don't have any control of that. And it's none of my business anyway. So.
Sort of to build off of that, I heard a saying where it was, how did it go? It was, if you talked to someone else the way that you talked about yourself to yourself, you wouldn't like that person, or something like that. Like a much more simplified version of that saying. So it's like sometimes you have to have an out of body experience and look at yourself from a perspective of another person. And if you're talking about that person in a different way, it's like taking a third person look at yourself. Yeah.
Yeah. Because often the things we've been told about ourselves were lies.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah. So, yeah. What about you, Kevin?
Yeah, Kev.
Well, I think I build on both. I think you guys are. You know what? I feel better already. This whole thing was just for me to.
Kevin came in here pretty low today.
So thank guys. I was trying to figure out how to feel better, and you two helped me out immensely.
Very good. Very good.
Yeah, I think you're right on the mark, because I believe the thing is that most times I I'm not a Dr. Phil, but I believe a lot of our self-esteem issues are because of those voices that speak to us in such a way that take away our belovedness, if you know what I mean. Like we too easily buy into the negativity about ourselves, whether it's internal or external. And I like what Rob said. I mean, so I'm often saying to people, look, don't worry about what anybody else thinks about you. You know, you got to know that you're beloved inside yourself. I'm constantly trying to remind people that from a sort of a faith perspective, that we're all created in the image of God. You are beloved just the way you are, you know? Right. And so sometimes that requires taking a look at, who we surround ourselves with, because sometimes that negative energy has a way of beating our self-esteem down. So
right, and we all play a role in it, because we can be the voices that say you're beloved.
That's right. Yeah.
So that was actually a Dr. Philism that, one attaboy can wipe out 99. You're an idiot.
That's right. Yeah, that's really exactly true. I mean, if you hear it enough, right? Like whichever message, that's what you're going to believe. So, anyway, so for me, it's about surrounding yourself with good people, which is proof positive here today, because I came here with a question about my self-esteem, and I surrounded myself with two wonderful, loving people, and they've got me feeling just like $1,000,000. I feel so good about myself now.
Dr. Ian and Dr. Rob will take your payment on the way out of the office.
Yeah, it's It's Stevenson and Henderson Self-Esteem Services.
That's right. That's right. All right, guys, that's great. World Food Day is coming up on Friday, or today. It's today, actually.
It is today.
So we're going to talk about it with Jim Cornelius, who is just on the other side of the Zoom room. So we're going to bring him in here right now.
Let's get that man in here.
And here he is. Jim Cornelius has joined us here on the Vicars Crossing, and we are thrilled to have him on this World Food Day. Hello, Jim. Welcome to our podcast.
Thank you for the invitation.
It's
right.
from
We're glad you're here.
In from what? Sunny Winnipeg?
Yeah, it's a little cold today, but no snow, because a year ago this time we had about 7 inches of snow. So we're saying life is good, but if there's no snow around, it's just a little cool.
My son's he's just actually leaving to come home from Jasper, Alberta, and he sent us pictures of the snow as he was leaving today. So so it's out there somewhere.
Golf season's officially over.
Yeah, it came to an abrupt end for sure.
Well, yeah, I was just calling with some colleagues out in BC, and they're up. Both of them are in sort of more mountainous areas, and snow is starting to arrive around them, not down, but they're starting to. So winter is coming.
It is. It is. All right, Jim, we're glad you're here. Kevin, would you give a formal introduction of Jim to our listeners, please?
It would be my pleasure to introduce Jim to the listeners. Jim Cornelius recently stepped down as executive director of the Canadian Foodgrains Bank. Now, I want to draw emphasis to the word step down. It does not say retired. Okay, that's a very subtle nuance, but I think it means something. So we'll get to that. Anyway, it's a position he held since 1997, 23 years. The Canadian Foodgrains Bank is a partnership of 15 Canadian churches and church agencies working to end global hunger. The Foodgrains Bank supports food assistance, nutrition and agriculture, and livelihood programs in over 35 countries and is considered one of Canada's leading international food agencies. The Foodgrains Bank raises significant funds from the public, particularly from farming and rural communities and in the agricultural sector. It also has an extensive program to educate and engage Canadians on hunger issues and staff dedicated to influencing policies regarding global hunger. Prior to his appointment as executive director, Jim worked as a consultant specializing in international relief and development and applied research. Jim's conducted numerous assignments for the Canadian International Development Agency, known as CIDA, and various non-governmental organizations. Many of these assignments involve food aid and food security programming. Born in Yorkton, Saskatchewan, his missionary parents took him to Kenya, East Africa at 6 months of age, where he lived until he completed high school and returned to Canada. So we're just very excited on this World Food Day to welcome you here. Well, I mean, the magic of podcasting is today is 2 days ahead of World Food Day, but those of you listening to this, it's being released on World Food Day. So a good day to have somebody with so much experience in terms of food security and insecurity. So Jim, welcome to the Vicars Crossing.
It's a delight to be with you.
You know, you might actually after this be able to retire because this is going to be the pinnacle of your entire life.
Oh yeah,
just spending time with us on the Vicars Crossing.
Yeah, this is it. This is it.
Right.
Anyway, let's.
I'm expecting with the renown I'll come from this that I'll now get it on the speaking tour.
Well, you may be. Anything could
earn my living on a speaking tour.
Sky is the limit now, Jim. Okay, so just brace yourself for what's about to come. You're going to get the Vicars Crossing bump. Okay, so let's start with World Food Day. For a lot of people in this country and around the world, perhaps. I mean, we have a lot of listeners listen everywhere. Certainly in the U.S. and Canada, mostly. But a lot of people are unaware of World Food Day. We hear about these other big days, about, you know, all the different sort of charities and everything that comes along. But World Food Day is not something that a lot of people I'm finding are as aware of. And I know like their theme this year is grow, nourish, sustain together. I wonder if you can, because you've had many of these behind you, can you tell people more about World Food Day, what it's about, how people can mark the day today? What can you do on this World Food Day to actually become more aware, get involved, make a difference? Can you share some of that with us?
Yeah, I mean, World Food Day, I'm not even sure when it was formally established, but like many days around the world, it's sort of set aside to allow people to sort of mark or think about something in particular. In our incredibly harried lives with so much coming at us, there are times when it's just valuable to stop for a moment and think about some particular issue or set of issues. And so World Food Day is one of those, and lots of organizations produce materials and share information on this day, just to highlight the issues of the importance of food. It's so fundamental to life itself. And then also the tragedy of hunger, or the importance of food. At the Foodgrains Bank, we have developed resources every year to mark the day, but we particularly focus on educational resources and on worship resources. And it so happens that World Food Day falls right around our Canadian Thanksgiving.
That's a coincidence.
It is a coincidence, but it works well for us. As opposed to our American cousins to the south, who have theirs a little later, but so we develop resources that people can use for around their family table at Thanksgiving, in church services at this time of year, when we are, just naturally comes to mind the issues of harvest and food and celebration and family. And so it's just a time to sort of pause for a moment, give some reflection and think about it. And in our crazy lives that we live with, so many coming at us. And so,
because we don't oftentimes, and I'm guilty, I'm for sure, we don't think about our food in the sense of where it comes from and how it's distributed and that sort of thing. So you're right. Yeah, it's a good day to do that, isn't it?
Yeah, and I said it ties in very much with Thanksgiving, with this notion of harvest, of gratitude, of Thanksgiving and gratitude for the life sustaining gift of food. And, and food, as we know, is more than just about nutrients. It's about tables.
Yes.
And it's about gathering around a table. And so that's the other side of food that we always need to reflect. And then in our Christian scriptures, it's about making sure there's room for everyone at the table, not just the immediate family. And I would say what I found most, I was going to say troubling, but disquieting about this Thanksgiving is we had our turkey, we had our Thanksgiving dinner, but normally we always make sure that the table is bigger. I mean, there's more people than we can fit around our table. And this year, our table was very small. Immediate family. And that just said, boy, we are living in a strange time right now. And but then what do we have to do in the context of this to make sure we're reaching out to expand the table in other ways? Because we just can't do it in the normal traditional ways. There's always room for one more chair to get squeezed in around that Thanksgiving dinner table.
Well, that's an interesting observation, actually. I mean, we've had a lot of guests on over the summer, a number of whom this theme of larger tables or flourishing tables or extending tables has become really sort of prevalent, particularly in a world where people are talking about building walls and protecting borders and all that goes with sort of a me first attitude. And so, like, Diana Butler Bass, who was on earlier in the summer, talked about this notion of a generous table, of extending a generous and a well set table. And like you said, Thanksgiving gives us that ability to do that. And in our context as a people who follow in the way of Jesus, it really does behoove us then to ask the question about how can we extend our tables, and perhaps our experiences of having, just like myself and Catherine Ann sitting alone at Thanksgiving dinner is a way for us to be reminded that many people live like this regularly. But, we have the abundance that this seems unusual to us when it happens. But how do we take this lived experience and expand it in such a way, as you say, we may not be doing that physically at our Thanksgiving tables, but on a citywide, a village-wide, a global level? How do we expand those tables?
Absolutely. I mean, and I think that's at the heart of what we think of the mission of the Foodgrains Bank is really about extending the table, making sure that everybody is invited to the table and has access to food and to be part of something bigger and the flourishing life that we all imagine and dream of. And we see the work of the Foodgrains Bank as sort of being a vehicle by which Canadians can help extend the table around the world, and in ways they can't invite those people to their Thanksgiving table directly, but they can, through the vehicle of the Foodgrains Bank, extend that table to others around. And we have sitting right on our right beside our dining room table, a little card that has the name of a person in a family that we're invited to, and it's different people in different families when we're having our shared meals, to sort of think about them as being part of our table. Then what are we doing to make sure that they have something to eat, right? So that we're conscious of that person, not just some statistic out in the world, but that person. So
that's fantastic.
Different ways that we can do this in our sort of our daily walk. And even, I mean, the congregation I'm part of has been very active and supportive of Agape Table, which is it's called Agape Table, and it's a place where those that don't have enough come for breakfast and all that. Well, during COVID, we've had to change how that's delivered and what's going on, but their needs have not gone away. If anything, have gone up. And so just normally I would sort of be more directly involved, but I went out to walk at lunchtime and dropped off my check for Agape Table just this lunchtime, right? Saying, okay, they need, you know, they need cash right now to help do all the things they're doing, and the volunteers can't come in, but there are ways we can stay engaged and need to stay engaged.
Yeah, you mentioned a lot of the great work that the Canadian Foodgrains Bank is doing around that, Jim, but those listening might not be aware of really what the Foodgrains Bank is. So I was wondering if you could maybe share with folks a little about what it is, its history, and anything more about how it's making a difference today.
Well, we're a partnership of 15 Canadian churches, church denominations, or their relief and development agencies. And so that includes everybody from the Mennonite Central Committee to World Renew, the arm of the Christian Reformed Church, to the Salvation Army, to the Christian Missionary Alliance, to the Primates World Relief and Development Fund, the humanitarian arm of the Anglican Church of Canada, to the Pentecostals, to the Baptists. All of the churches have said, let's work together on this work of ending global hunger. And we were established in 1983, and as a collective work of the churches. And our job is to mobilize resources for these church agencies to support their global hunger work around the world. Many of them are engaged in work all over the world. We help mobilize resources to support their work and the partnerships they work through around the world. It started off largely working primarily with farmers, and farmers donating grain here in Canada, primarily on the prairies to start with, and that would be shipped overseas to where there was need. Our program has changed dramatically over the years. We no longer ship Canadian grain, but farmers still donate grain, still grow crops for us, and then it gets sold in the market, and the money gets sent to us, and then we use it to buy food in those areas where there's need. So the principle stays the same. The mechanisms has it been adapted. And of course, we have lots of others that participate then in this work, you know, and congregations that take up collections, and just individuals that send us checks and to support this work. So it's a much bigger partnership, but it's still at its heart is this deep sense of food producers in Canada wanting to make sure they're sharing of their abundance with those who are in need around the world. And I said, it gets programmed out through all of our members into different countries around the world, doing either direct relief work during times of crisis when there's a drought or displacement caused by conflict or flooding that's disrupted people's livelihoods. Or we also work at long-term livelihoods and food security for communities, to a lot of work with farmers to strengthen their production and their agricultural systems. And then nutrition programs really aimed at very young children to make sure they're well nourished, and to nursing mothers, because it's so critical that kids get a good early start. I mean, if you're malnourished early, the impact is lifelong on you. And if you can get a good start, then it's great.
That's great.
You do some work with around seed development and stuff too? Is that a part of like, you know, in terms of like, I was reading yesterday about the Indigenous Seed Circle crisis because of COVID and the inability to get seed and so on. So is there work being done as well around providing in places where there are challenges, you know, the seed development they need in order to be able to produce?
Yeah, we're less engaged in sort of what I would call seed development, but in contexts where there has been some sort of disaster that's really affected communities where they've either been forced to eat their seed or they've lost their seed due to flooding. I was in Malawi last year where you know, the big hurricane had come through and cyclone had come through and devastated whole communities and just washed away their crops and their seeds and everything. So what you do there is you are making sure that you get their seed replenished with the types of seeds they're looking for and everything so they can get back up and going again. So that's a bit more what we do on the seed side. And but we really try and support communities being able to have the ability to store their seeds, to save their seeds if need be, to purchase seeds in the market, so that it's a sustainable system for them when it comes to seeds.
Now, 23 years in leadership is a very long time.
It's longer than you've been alive, Ian.
That is definitely true. Definitely true. And you have no doubt seen like many challenges in those years. I was wondering if you could share some success stories or some stories where we can see like hope and change and some positive outcomes.
Yeah, I mean, let me just talk at the very big picture and then I'll get down to some more specifics. But I mean, I remember when I was came back to Canada and was going into university in the early 70s. And we were dealing with some major famines around the world at that time. The statistics were showing that a very high proportion of the world's population faced chronic hunger. And if I compare today to what it was like in the early 70s, dramatic progress has been made in reducing the prevalence of hunger in the world. The proportion of the world's population that is hungry is much lower today than it was in the early 70s. And secondly, it is rare that we see famine today. We still see lots of hunger, but it's rare we see famine because we've learned what it takes to actually prevent famine, what the steps are to stop it from happening. And so a lot of the efforts that are globally made and the systems have been put in globally ensure that food gets to people at times of critical crisis to stop it from turning into a food crisis, into famine. And so just last week, or even maybe it was just earlier this week, I can't even remember now, the World Food
Listen, the way the world is going, every day feels like a year.
The World Food Program was just given the Nobel Peace Prize for its work on hunger.
Yeah,
it has, it really serves as a bit of an underlying global infrastructure for helping to make sure that as a global community we can stop famines from happening, and so I see tremendous progress. And then to make it more concrete, I mean. I still remember a trip I took into Niger, quite a few years ago. There had been a huge drought this is in West Africa, big drought across the region, and we had been providing food. And I still remember we got to one community where our food should have been there 2 months earlier. And for some very complicated logistical reasons and border issues had not arrived. And we went into that community. And I remember talking to a young woman there, mother and a child, and the desperation in her voice because of the hunger in that community that was being faced. And she had a young child that was trying to nurse, and she was pushing the child away because she's, at one point, frustration. I remember she lifted her brows, pointed to her breasts, and says, "There's no milk in these breasts for my child." And
wow.
Just one of these heart-wrenching moments.
Yeah.
Absolutely heart-wrenching. The next day, we were in another community about 80 kilometers away where our food had arrived 2 months earlier as planned. And again, talking to another mother there, and she pointed to there were sort of these two boys over in the corner making quite a bit of a ruckus. They were fighting, basically, wrestling and fighting.
Yeah.
And she, you know, we were talking, and then she looked over and she had this big smile on her face at these two boys. And rather than scolding them, she just smiled. And then she said, those, you know, 2 months ago, those boys did not have the energy to fight.
Wow.
Wow.
So she saw them fighting as good news.
Right.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
They had the energy. And so the fact that we can get food, and increasingly the world can get food into these crisis areas, is, you know, that would just be the difference it can make. Then I remember in another case in Ethiopia, down in the southern area of Ethiopia, up in the hills around Sodo, meeting with this widow. And we had been working through the Tarapaza Development Association, a local church agency in that area, to strengthen the introduction of conservation agriculture, to strengthen agriculture production. This was a widow who had a very small piece of land and struggling to produce on her land because she would have to hire people to plow for her and hire people to do different things. And so through this new mechanisms of agriculture we were working with her, that meant a lot. She didn't need to have people coming in and plowing. She was using different techniques, and it was really rehabilitating her land in a very dramatic way. And I remember looking at two pieces of her land, parts that had been rehabilitated and the other that hadn't, and seeing the difference in the crop she was able to produce on those pieces of land. And this is something she could do, and she was so proud of herself.
Yeah.
She was a little tiny, short little woman. I'm not very tall, but I was towering over her. And but she at one point came up to me, and she, with her finger, she was pointing in my chest, just poking me in my chest, and said, I challenge you to find anybody who's doing a better job than me doing this. And if you can't find anyone doing a better job, then I expect you to come back and give me an award. She said. But I was just struck by the fact that the support we were providing was enabling this woman to really have a sense of getting control back in her life, being able to get things going again for herself and feel hopeful for the future. And
Right.
I know we have thousands and thousands of stories like that tell, but she still sticks in my mind just because she was such a charming and vibrant woman.
Ethiopia is an interesting case for those, like Ian is too young, but for Rob and I, who sort of came of age during the time when, you know, the Ethiopian famine and, you know, World Relief and concerts and, you know, Bob Geldof and the whole thing, and
Farm Aid and everything.
Farm Aid. And so when you think about Ethiopia, that's an interesting case. I think you can probably share that Ethiopia is not what people think about anymore.
No. It has made tremendous progress in reducing hunger. It's by no means is it out of the woods, by no means is not hunger present. But when we look at the proportion of the people in Ethiopia that are going hungry today relative to what it was in the 70s or during the 80s, during those famine years, it is dramatically lower. And that's for a number of reasons. One is just putting in place better systems for identifying when there is a food crisis and responding. The government has, with support of many countries like Canada, what they call a productive safety net system that makes sure assistance gets to the most vulnerable who are hungry and chronically hungry and gets there, and while working with them to find long-term solutions. At the same time, there's good monitoring systems across the country. If there's a bad drought or something that's really affecting different communities, we learn about it quickly. There's information quickly. People can begin to mobilize resources. Donors can come in and say, okay, aid is needed there. Systems are in place to quickly get it out to people so it doesn't turn into famine. So just years ago, the crop situation and drought situation was as bad, if not worse, than it was in 1983 when the famine hit.
Wow. Yeah.
I mean, and of course, and you had a much bigger population than then.
Yeah.
However, the systems were in place to respond in a timely way so that it did not turn into famine, which is why I say we don't see the famines we used to see because of the ways of working. So and just more generally traveling around Ethiopia, which I've done a fair bit, you just see progress being made in lots of ways. But it's not inevitable.
No.
It can go backwards as easily as it can go forwards.
Right.
You need to keep, governments and communities and people, we need to keep working at it. We can't say, oh, job's done.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Moving on.
It's
Yeah.
all over. You really have to stay at this work. But it's not a hopeless by any means. And some people sort of say, oh, it's sort of feed global hunger. It's just, it's sort of almost hopeless. Well, it's not. There's huge things that can be done. And in many countries that used to face serious levels of hunger, they don't face it anymore.
I'm glad you were mentioning that about, systems in place now that perhaps weren't, because we were just chatting briefly before you joined us, Jim. And some people may think that the issue is more around the fact that there's not enough, but that's really not what it's about. It's not, there's abundance. It's the systems that need to be in place to get that abundance to those in need, right?
Yeah, and to ensure that people have the livelihoods, because in the end, if you have a livelihood, if you have income, you're not going to go hungry. I know traders all over the world, and traders are going to get you food.
Yes.
If you can afford it, they're going to get it to you, right? They have an amazing, and as you say, we're producing more per capita today than we ever have.
Right.
But it's what is disrupting people's livelihoods. And right now, there's three things that we're seeing that is causing hunger rates to start to go up. The last 5 years, the progress we were seeing is sort of flattened, and if anything is going backwards a bit. So but it's been three primary things. Biggest one being conflict. So we have huge numbers of hungry people in Syria. In these places. I mean, 15 years ago, Syria did not have much food insecurity. It was most people had, in fact, middle-class lives and were comfortable lives in terms of their food situation. They had safety net systems in place, the government had. And so conflict has been a huge driver, because that's the second thing has been increasing climatic disruptions, right? Storms that are deeper and stronger, that are causing more damage than they used to.
You're talking about the climate change?
More repeated, yeah.
The climate change hoax. That's what you're talking about, right? That
hoax. I'm talking about droughts being deeper and more frequent. I'm talking about storms being stronger, and then of course, with more people on the land, these things have bigger impact, as people have often moved into more marginal areas, which get affected by these types of events. So that's something. But again, there are ways in which we can begin to deal with that, even besides the issue of mitigating, climate change. If I look at Bangladesh, 30 years ago, when some of those big cyclones hit there, you would sometimes have, millions of people displaced, but hundreds of thousands of people dying.
Right.
The government and others have put in place shelters and all sorts of systems and mechanisms and early warning, such that today the same level of storm doesn't cross the same level of damage it did 30 years ago.
Right.
Similarly, when I was talking about conservation agriculture, what we're looking at, some of these agricultural mechanisms, they're designed so you can preserve moisture in the soil better, you can withstand drought better. There's ways in which we can adapt to these situations, as opposed to throwing up our hands and saying there's nothing to be done. So, and then of course, just plain old economic disruption, right? We've seen, COVID is now disrupting livelihoods all over the world. In Canada, it's not, hunger is up, but it's not driving it up as much as in other places, because what do we have in Canada? We had that thing called the CERB.
Right.
Suddenly everybody got a check coming into their, when they lost their job, that allowed them to go down to the grocery store and buy food. Well, many places in the world, governments did not have the capacity to put in place rapidly that type of social safety net to, and so we're worrying that hunger could go up dramatically each year as economies are being disrupted. And we're we're working in different places to try and protect livelihoods as best we can and to respond to these crises that are happening around the world.
Yeah, these responses too. One of the things that's most impressive about Canadian Foodgrains Bank, I mean, our focus here on this podcast is how faith intersects with the public square, and certainly hunger is a global public issue. You know, we use words like food insecurity. Now, I love that bit that George Carlin does about euphemisms. Food insecurity is a different way of saying hunger. But you know, people are hungry. And that's a global issue. And one of the impressive parts, and you touched on this earlier, but there's 15 member churches and order organizations or agencies which do this work. And if you go online and take a look at the webpage, you'll see they cover a vast theological sort of spectrum. So there's lots, I would say there's not just a lot of difference, but there's a lot of disagreement on some very, you know, important things in these groups. But what they've all managed to do through Canadian Foodgrains Bank is lay aside those things to focus on addressing something which is critically important in the public square, which is hunger, which is food insecurity. I wonder if you can talk about how God is able to see this work getting done. You know, like I think sometimes God gets work done in spite of ourselves. And I just think that our difference is something God celebrates. And so I mean, when I see the scope of what you folks have been doing and the fact that it on an umbrella way includes so many different Christian iterations, I wonder if you can share a little bit about what it's been like to work in that ecumenical way. I try to do this at home. My wife is a Roman Catholic padre in the Navy and a Roman Catholic chaplain at a women's university. And I'm the old Anglican priest. And so we're trying to keep it covered, but we're not doing anything close to what you guys are doing. So help us, please understand just how rich it is to work in such a theologically diverse environment.
Yeah, I think there are two things. One, there isn't a lot of theological disagreement about the fact that as the commands of Scripture are pretty explicit and clear from the earliest chapters to right to the end, right? I mean, if there's one theme that keeps reoccurring itself, it's you have some obligation to the widow, to the orphan, to the hungry, to those that are in distress. I mean, there's just, and none of our traditions disagree with that.
Right.
And in fact, I have just a little story. I mean, shortly after I took on this job, I was sitting in the basement of a church. I don't remember even which denomination it was in Saskatchewan, but your classic rural church basement. And there was a group of people gathered there supporting the Foodgrains Bank. And I got talking, and it became quickly clear to me on a whole range of theological matters, they actually disagreed a fair bit. Not only that, they disagreed politically on a whole bunch of things too. And we're at sort of lunch having a conversation. It becomes clear that one of the people, I can't remember which side he was sitting on me because he was sitting on my right, but he was very active with the NDP then in Saskatchewan. And on my left was someone very active with the recently born Reform Party.
Reform Party.
And so, but here they were at the table together, right? And they disagreed on a whole range of issues. But they both agreed that hunger was not acceptable. It's not what was intended. And secondly, they agreed that as Christians, they had an obligation to do something. They couldn't sit on the sideline. Now, when we get into what you do and what the best tactics are and what's the best strategy and what the best policy, they'll start to disagree again. Well, fair enough. Those are legitimate debates. As I often joke myself, I disagree with myself during the course of the day. Strategy is sometimes. You know, you think this is a great idea, and then by afternoon you go, well, maybe not. Thing I thought. But the other piece is that we work through our church network. So we allow the diversity of our churches in terms of who they partner with and even some of the strategies they employ and how they work around the world to exist. We don't force everybody to actually have to do exactly the same thing in the same way and through the same set of partners. We allow for that diversity in terms of how it gets expressed in the partnerships they form and who they work with. So, and that's choices they make. Now, it needs to operate within certain agreed parameters, right? It's not like completely free, but things that as a board collectively, everybody said, okay, these are the agreed parameters. Now work with those bodies and those networks that you have. And so it allows for the diversity in programming as well. And so it works remarkably well. And people enjoy being together with each other, and they know that certain issues, this is not the table on which there are other tables to debate those issues. Yeah. On this, we can work together. And it serves as I think as an enormous public witness in Canada as well.
Yeah. Amen.
Yeah, exactly.
That churches are working together on this. And in communities, we have these growing projects where people get together, they get a piece of land, the farmers go out and they get inputs donated, and then they donate all their labor and their machinery and their time. Yeah. To grow a crop, and you'll see signs, but it will be the Catholic Church and the Pentecostals and the Baptist and the Uniteds all got together to do this project.
Yeah.
In the community. And it's amazing. And those who may be skeptical about faith are welcome to be part of this, right? And
you'll find a lot of people even outside of any faith tradition agreeing with the fact that people should not be hungry in our world. I mean, we got enough, right? So it doesn't matter what side of the fence you're sitting on. That's one thing we can gather at a table as we go back to that original discussion.
But there are still some in the world who think it's not my problem.
Yes, right, exactly, too. Yeah, very much so.
And this is a public witness to say, actually, it's not something you can turn away and look the other way on, right? Doesn't matter that it's happening in some far off place, right? Yeah. Or they'll say, what about Hungary and Canada? Right? Should we focus on them? So I get those calls, not infrequently, and I say, absolutely, please, volunteer, give money, get involved in
local,
your own community. But it's not an either. These are not either or questions.
It's not a binary here. We're going to do one or the other. My favorite is when it's, do we feed the hungry or support the homeless veteran? And it's like, well, listen here, I'm all about dealing with that homeless veteran, but we're talking about two very different issues here. Anyway, sorry, Rob, I cut you off.
Oh no, I was just gonna say, that the idea of witness is so important. To see that and to watch what you're doing in your work with that, because oftentimes we have discussions about, especially in our traditional churches, of getting outside of our buildings a little bit more and getting into our communities, and how do we do that? And we do have other ecumenical partners and denominations and such in our areas, but we talk about, well, what do we connect with, right? And this is a perfect example as a witness to say, it doesn't matter what they think or believe or how they see God or Jesus. The fact of the matter is there's hungry people in our neighborhood. Yep. And as a witness, look what they're doing at the Foodgrains Bank. We could do that in our community. So good for you. Yeah, that's great.
No, and I just, another little story. I mean, in terms of public witness, I was in the Bekaa Valley in Lebanon, and there were, thousands and thousands of refugees from Syria that have crossed over into this very small country of Lebanon, which has all of its own divisions and stuff, and now they're hosting
Beirut.
Well, just huge. I mean, it's a population of about 4 million people, and they have now over 1 million refugees suddenly coming in. I'm just trying to get Canadians to think about that. Assume that there's a crisis, civil war in the United States. It's becoming less hard. How would I put it?
Yeah.
That even becomes imaginable today.
Yeah.
But there, conflict breaks up, and we had the equivalent of 7 to 8 million Americans suddenly cross our borders, start putting tents in all our parks, renting all the apartments in our cities, jacking up prices, jacking up food prices going up.
Yeah.
Imagine the political, the resentments and issues that would happen here in Canada, right? You get it sometimes. We get a few hundred crossing our border down here.
That's right. Yeah.
And and so of course all the stresses on Lebanese society pressures, and this little Baptist church in the Bekaa Valley says, but our job is to reach out to these folks. These are our neighbors. These are people, it's not for us to be worrying about ourselves.
Yeah.
And so they take on the task of saying, what can we do with these people that are now all in the parks and the areas, and began reaching out and helping them. And so we've been supporting that church in its program. And I've been out to meet with many of those refugees, and they appreciate the fact that those people come and they know them by name and they care for them and they see them and are not saying, just seeing them as the enemy. And historically, the Syrians were the oppressors, were the ones that occupied Lebanon. And so, so again, I just watched that church say it's a public witness for how we need to be, that's going on, and we're supporting them in that, in their public witness in that crisis.
Wow.
And you've certainly been a witness in your journey as well, Jim. Your journey and your faith journey is evidenced in your long career and the work that you're doing. I was wondering, we've heard a lot about the work you're doing. Can you share a little bit about yourself, your background, and maybe where your faith journey has led you so far?
Yeah, well, I think as I said in my intro, my parents hauled me out of Yorkton, Saskatchewan when I was 6 months old. I didn't have much choice in the matter, and flew off to Kenya and East Africa.
I just got to interrupt you for a second. There's something about going from Yorkton to Kenya that seems disparate. That's a huge leap, Jim. Like that's not, that's not for the faint of heart.
Yeah, no. Well, and to honor my parents, I mean, when they were invited to go there, I mean, they literally had to pull out a map, right, an atlas.
Wow.
To figure
It's incredible,
place, right? And then, but the call of God to go there, and they were with the Pentecostal Assemblies of Canada.
Okay.
There was a minister and had been pastoring a church in Yorkton, and so off they went with not knowing much, just sort of in faith and sort of sense of calling. And so and with me, and I was our eldest, the firstborn in their arms, and arrived, and then they were up country into a relatively remote part, and where they worked for the next 10 years, where I grew up, and the rural part of Kenya. And then my father was asked to take on a regional sort of supervisory responsibility for their work in East Africa. And then we moved to Nairobi when I was 10 years old, and still have very deep memories of that. I
bet.
That I entered civilization in, and there was, there were newspapers and magazines.
I bet.
And because we lived in a rural area, and we get to town occasionally, but not. I still remember occasionally we get up to Kisumu, and they had a building there that was 4 stories tall, and you could go to the top of it. And as a boy, we remember we would think we got to go climb the skyscraper.
Yeah.
So. But just to say that was the formative years of my life, and my parents' commitment to this international work and engagement with the church and its global work. And so when I came back to Canada after, that was sort of what you did after high school. You came to Canada to make your way in the world, and university. Over those study years, I decided I really did want to work in the international field, and so began to focus more on the relief and international development side of things, feeling that was equally part of what God calls us to be a part of in the world, right? Not just on the church side. And even I still remember my mom was running a medical clinic, every mornings, and the mission station we go up. My dad was a local dentist. He was extracting teeth in our backyard.
Wow.
There was, they were very involved in school work and the establishment of schools. So all of this work was very holistic in a sense of you're dealing with whole people, right?
Yeah.
And all of their needs and desires and ambitions. And so that's been just, I just felt called into this type of work, but then you had to find how you navigate your way into it, right? Coming out of universities. And
you eventually made your way into the Anglican Church?
I eventually made my way into the Anglican Church. Part of that was due to marriage.
That'll do it to you.
Marrying someone who I had gone to boarding school with in Kenya. Her father had been a medical missionary in Congo, in Congo and Zaire. So, but she came from a different tradition, so we had to navigate our way through that, and eventually through, after being part of a home church, we got connected with St. George's Anglican Church in downtown Ottawa. We were living in Ottawa.
Oh, very good.
It was a very interesting, diverse place with many different folks from different places, and that became home for us for many years. And And I used to say I'm going to an Anglican church, and then after that we went to another Anglican church, and then to another Anglican church. So for a period I said I probably should stop saying I'm going to an Anglican church and start saying I am an Anglican.
Yeah, you're in now. Yeah. Once you've moved from one church to the other, and it just keeps going, you're in. That's it.
But some people have said, well, isn't that a big move from the Pentecostal church to the Anglican church? And I said, it's actually not as big a leap. Because for me, what I appreciated in the Anglican tradition was the liturgy and the sense of worship, and that everything isn't just focused on the sermon.
Right.
There was, I would call, more word traditions.
Right.
Sermon is a bit of a dud, then the service is a bit of a dud sometimes. Everything seems like preliminaries to the main event, which is the sermon. With the Pentecostal tradition, of course, worship is a key part, and sometimes if the Spirit moves, you don't even get the sermon. And that's not seen as a problem, right?
That's true.
So there was this element. It's in a different form, in a different vessel.
Right.
But the notion of being in the presence of God, and that is still very important to me. And I just find that I experience it in a way that fits better with me in the Anglican tradition.
Yes, well, we're certainly thrilled to have you, but more so thrilled to have you as the leadership and the work that you've done with the Foodgrains Bank and the difference that you've made in people's lives through your ministry, which it really is in a big way. So, Jim, on this World Food Day, we thank you for spending some time with us to educate us, but also to remind us to be witnesses. And gather around tables and find those things that Jesus called us to do that are most important, which is to feed people and see people and invite them in. So thank you so much, and we wish you all the best as you move forward.
Amen to that.
Thank you.
And if I could add, you probably have some advice, Jim, on this World Food Day. If people go to the webpage, is there a way to give? Did I see something on there that said there's a 4-to-1 matching going on?
Well, we receive a lot of support from the Canadian government on a matching basis. So we're able to take donated dollars that we receive and extend them a lot further because of the matching support we receive from the government of Canada. And that, again, is a testament to the work of the churches working together, that they've built the credibility with the government to say this is a great vehicle for connecting government, publics, and doing good work all around the world.
So go and give, folks.
Good. Go look for that. And again, thanks to Jim on this World Food Day. We're wrapping up another edition of the Vicars Crossing podcast. This was our bonus edition this week, and I'm glad we got to be able to get Jim in to do this. Thanks again to our sponsors. Just before we leave today, we want to give a shout out to A. Miller George Funeral Home, where each life is celebrated, and their sister company, Cremation London and Middlesex, both family owned and operated. Also to Hyde Park Care Pharmacy and Carol and the staff out there, and to our friends at Molly Maid, where you can make your home a healthy haven. Once again, our thanks to Jim. I'm Rob Henderson from Holy Trinity St. Stephen's.
Kevin George here, St. Aidan's.
And my name is Ian.
And we'll look forward to seeing everybody again on the Vicars Crossing, where faith intersects with the public square, and where I always remind my good friend Kevin to always look both ways
before you cross the street.
Thank you for listening. Our hosts are Kevin George and Rob Henderson. Our producer and composer is myself, Ian, with original artwork done by Elizabeth Dodman. If you have any questions or want to know where to find us, tweet us at Vicars Crossing or find us on Facebook at The Vicars Crossing. If you have any other questions about anything heard on this podcast, leave us a comment or look in the description to find out more. Thanks!